Hi guys. Tonight we step into a world where the cold doesn't just nip at your fingers, it settles into your bones and stays there until spring decides to show mercy. Picture this, a small English village, somewhere in the 13th century. As the last light of a November afternoon bleeds out across the horizon, the sky is the color of bruised iron. Smoke rises from a dozen thatched roofs, curling into the frozen air like the village itself is exhaling. Slow and tired. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a child cries. And everywhere there is mud. Mud frozen into hard ridges that will break your ankle if you're not careful. Mud that was soft this morning and is now a trap of ice and filth. You probably wouldn't survive this. Not without a few centuries of adaptation. Anyway, your modern body, accustomed to central heating and down jackets and the miracle of insulated windows, would rebel against this place within hours. Your fingers would ache, your lungs would burn, and by nightfall, you'd be bargaining with whatever god would listen for just one more log on the fire. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are now? Now, dim the lights. Let your breathing slow, and imagine yourself stepping into this frozen village at the edge of winter. The year is 1267, or maybe 1314. Or perhaps 1402. It doesn't matter much. Really. For peasants, winter looked roughly the same across several centuries. A long, dark tunnel between harvest and planting, between abundance and scarcity, between life and the very real possibility of death. The medieval world didn't change as quickly as ours does. A peasant from the 11th century and one from the 14th would recognize each other's struggles instantly. They would understand the weight of that first frost without needing to exchange a single word. You stand at the edge of the village now, and the smell hits you before anything else. Smoke. Yes, wood smoke and peat smoke, and the acrid bite of burning animal dung. But beneath that, something earthier. The scent of livestock. The faint sourness of human sweat trapped in wool that hasn't been washed in weeks. The mustiness of thatch slowly rotting above your head. It's not pleasant. Exactly. But it's not unbearable either. It's simply the smell of survival. You'll get used to it faster than you think. The cottages cluster together like animals seeking warmth from each other. There's no grand plan here. No neat rows or paved streets. The buildings crouch where they were built, following the logic of the land rather than any architect's vision. Most are small, shockingly small by modern standards. A single room, perhaps 15 feet by 20 if the family is lucky, with walls of wattle and daub that look like they might collapse if you leaned against them too hard. The roofs are thick with straw and reeds, dark with age and moisture. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Those roofs were home to entire ecosystems. Insects, mice, birds, all of them nesting in the thatch, sometimes falling into the room below. You might wake up with a spider on your face. You might find mouse droppings in your breakfast. This was normal. This was life. The light is fading fast now, and you notice how the village seems to contract as darkness approaches. Doors close. Shutters where they exist are pulled tight. The few people still outside move quickly, purposefully, their breath fogging in the air. No one lingers. No one stands around chatting. There's work to be done before the light disappears entirely. And besides, the cold is already biting. It finds the gaps in your clothing, the exposed skin at your wrists and neck. It presses against your chest like a hand trying to push you back inside. You follow a narrow path between two cottages, your feet crunching on frozen mud. The sound is louder than you expected. Everything is louder in this silence. No cars, no airplanes, no distant hum of electricity. Just the wind, the creak of wood, the occasional grunt of a pig from somewhere nearby, and voices, muffled by walls, speaking in a dialect of English you can barely understand. The language has shifted. You realize these people are speaking your tongue. Technically, but it's been worn into different shapes by time. A woman emerges from a doorway ahead of you, and for a moment your eyes meet. She's younger than she looks, maybe 30, but her face is weathered, lined by sun and wind and worry. She carries a bundle of sticks under one arm, kindling for the fire that will determine whether her family sleeps warm or cold tonight. She doesn't smile. She doesn't greet you. She simply looks, assesses, and moves on. Strangers are rare here, and rarely welcome. Every extra mouth means less food to go around. Historians still argue about exactly how harsh these winters were. Some point to evidence of the medieval warm period, suggesting that temperatures between roughly 900 and 1,300 were actually milder than we might assume, perhaps only a degree or two cooler than modern averages. Others emphasize the little ice age that began creeping in during the 14th century, bringing winters so brutal that rivers froze solid and crops failed across Europe. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the complexity. Some winters were survivable, some winters were not, and peasants had no way of knowing which kind they were facing until they were already in the middle of it. What we do know is this: winter was not a season of rest. That romantic image of peasants sitting by the fire, telling stories while snow falls gently outside, it's not entirely wrong. But it's not the whole picture either. Winter was work, different work than summer, perhaps, but work nonetheless. There were animals to feed, tools to mend, grain to thresh. There was firewood to gather, water to haul, food to ration carefully so it would last until spring. The days were short, yes, but they were full, and the nights, the long, dark, endless nights, those were for sleeping, for dreaming, for lying awake and listening to the wind howl and wondering if you'd stored enough grain, gathered enough wood, done enough to keep death at bay for one more season. The cold settles deeper now as the sun disappears completely. You pull your cloak tighter, assuming you have one, and look for the faint glow of firelight through the cracks in a cottage wall. That's where you're headed. Into the warmth, such as it is. Into the smoke and the smell and the press of bodies. Into the heart of medieval winter. You push open the door, though door is a generous word for what is essentially a few planks of oak held together by leather hinges and hope. It scrapes against the floor, swollen with damp, and the sound announces your arrival to everyone inside, which is to say, everyone, because in a peasant cottage, there is no privacy. There are no separate rooms, no hallways, no quiet corners where you might escape for a moment of solitude. There is only this, one room, perhaps 300 square feet if the family has done well for themselves, and within it, everything that constitutes a life. The first thing you notice is the smoke. It doesn't drift gently upward like smoke from a modern fireplace. It billows. It hangs. It fills the upper half of the room like a grey ghost that refuses to leave. Your eyes sting immediately. Your throat tightens. You want to cough. And you do. And no one looks at you strangely. because everyone coughs here. This is simply what breathing feels like when your home has no chimney. And most peasant homes didn't have chimneys. That's a detail that surprises people. We imagine medieval cottages with those quaint stone chimneys poking through the thatch. But chimneys were expensive. They required skill to build and materials that cost money. For most of the medieval period, peasant families made do with a central hearth, a fire pit in the middle of the room, or sometimes against one wall, with the smoke left to find its own way out through gaps in the roof, through the thatch itself, through whatever cracks and holes existed in the structure. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The smoke actually served a purpose. It blackened the thatch. Yes, and it blackened the lungs of everyone who lived beneath it. But it also killed insects, preserved the roof from rot, and kept the worst of the vermin at bay. A smoky house was, in its own terrible way, a healthier house. The alternative was a roof crawling with life and falling apart within a decade. Your eyes adjust slowly to the dim interior. The only light comes from the fire itself and from a single window, if you can call it that. It's really just a hole in the wall, perhaps a foot square, covered with a wooden shutter that's currently closed against the cold. In wealthier homes, you might find oiled linen stretched across such openings, allowing a pale, filtered light to enter. In poorer homes, you get darkness or drafts. Pick your poison. The walls press close around you. This type of construction is called cruck frame building. And once you understand it, you'll see it everywhere in your mind's eye. Two massive curved timbers, like the ribs of some ancient beast, rise from the ground and meet at the top to form an arch. Several of these arches, spaced along the length of the building, create the skeleton of the house. Everything else is filling, walls of wattle and daub, which is to say thin branches woven together like a basket and then plastered over with a mixture of clay, straw, animal dung, and whatever else was available. The smell you noticed outside, part of it comes from these walls. The dung never quite loses its character, especially when the walls get damp. And the walls are always damp. You reach out and touch the surface. It's cold and slightly tacky, like clay that never fully dried. Your fingers come away grayish. The wall itself is perhaps 6 inches thick, not nearly enough to keep out a determined winter wind. Drafts snake through invisible gaps, finding your ankles, your neck, the small of your back. Historians still argue about just how cold these interiors actually got. Some reconstructions suggest that a well-maintained fire could keep the temperature bearable, at least near the hearth. Others point out that bearable is doing a lot of work in that sentence. We're not talking about comfort here. We're talking about not freezing to death. Those are different standards. The floor beneath your feet is beaten earth, literally just dirt, packed down by generations of footsteps until it's almost as hard as stone. In some homes, rushes or straw are scattered across this surface, providing a thin layer of insulation and somewhere for scraps and crumbs to disappear. The rushes are changed occasionally, not often enough. By modern standards, underneath them, the floor holds the memory of everything that's ever been spilled, dropped, or tracked in from outside. You try not to think about it too hard. A woman sits near the fire, stirring something in a pot. She doesn't look up. Children huddle nearby. 2 of them, maybe 3, it's hard to tell in the dimness, where one small body ends and another begins. They're wrapped in wool, their faces smudged with soot, their eyes reflecting the firelight like small animals caught in a lantern's beam. Against the far wall, you make out a shape that might be a bed, or at least the suggestion of one. It's really just a raised platform of wood, covered with a straw-stuffed mattress and whatever blankets the family has managed to accumulate over the years. Everyone sleeps there. Everyone. The furniture is sparse. A rough table. Perhaps a bench, a stool or two, a chest where valuables are kept, not gold or jewels. Of course, but the things that matter to people who have little, a change of clothing, a few tools, perhaps a document if anyone in the family can read, which is unlikely. Everything serves a purpose. There's no decoration, no comfort for comfort's sake. Every object in this room exists because it helps someone survive. You settle onto a bench near the fire, and the heat reaches you in waves, intense on your face and chest, completely absent at your back. This is the paradox of the central hearth. You can be sweating on one side of your body and shivering on the other. The family has arranged themselves with practiced efficiency, each person positioned to catch the maximum warmth while leaving room for the cooking and the tending of the fire. There's a geometry to it, a choreography developed over years of cold nights. The fire crackles and pops. Someone coughs. A child whimpers in its sleep. Outside, the wind picks up, and you hear it moving through the thatch above you. A soft, rushing sound like distant water. The cottage creaks in response, its timbers settling, its walls flexing slightly against the pressure. This building is alive in its own way, breathing with the weather, shifting with the seasons. It won't last forever. Most peasant cottages didn't. 20 years, maybe 30 if the family was diligent about repairs. And then the whole process would begin again. New timbers, new walls, new dung mixed with new clay. But tonight, the cottage holds. Tonight, the fire burns. And tonight, you begin to understand something about these people and this place. Warmth is not a right here. It's an achievement. Every degree of heat in this room represents labor, wood chopped, fires tended, walls patched against the endless hunger of the cold. You earn your warmth, or you go without. The smoke curls above you, thick and eternal, and you breathe it in because you have no other choice. The fire commands the room. Everything revolves around it, literally. The family arranges itself in a rough semicircle, bodies angled toward the flames like flowers turning toward the sun. The cooking happens here. The warmth radiates from here. The light, such as it is, begins and ends here. If the cottage is a body, the hearth is its heart, and you can feel it beating in the flicker and pulse of the flames. You watch the woman tend the fire with the casual expertise of someone who has done this 10,000 times. She doesn't think about it anymore. Not consciously. Her hands know the work. A gentle push of the embers here. A repositioning of the logs there. A careful addition of fuel when the flames begin to sink. It looks simple. It isn't. Keeping a fire alive through a medieval winter was a skill passed down through generations. And getting it wrong could mean the difference between waking up cold and not waking up at all. The fuel itself tells a story. In this particular cottage, they're burning wood, oak, and ash. Mostly, with some smaller branches of hazel thrown in for kindling. But wood was not always available. That's something we forget. Imagining medieval England as an endless forest waiting to be harvested. By the 13th century, much of that forest was gone, cleared for farmland or claimed by lords who guarded their timber jealously. Peasants had rights to collect fallen branches in some areas, a practice called estover, but cutting living trees was often forbidden. The penalties could be severe, and so people burned what they could find, what they could afford. what they were allowed. In some regions, that meant peat blocks of partially decomposed vegetation cut from bogs and dried until they would smolder for hours. Peat burned slower than wood, with a distinctive earthy smell that some people found pleasant and others found suffocating. In other areas, peasants burned animal dung, dried into cakes and stacked like bricks against the cottage wall. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention: cow dung, when properly dried, burns remarkably well. It doesn't smell as bad as you'd expect, mostly just a heavy, organic mustiness, and it produces a steady, lasting heat. Families who kept cattle considered their dung a resource as valuable as the milk or meat. Nothing was wasted. Nothing could be wasted. You lean closer to the fire, and the heat presses against your face like a hand. Your skin tightens. Your eyes water. Though whether from the warmth or the smoke, you can't be sure. The smoke, always the smoke. It's thinner now that you've been inside for a while. Or maybe your lungs have simply surrendered to the inevitable. You breathe it in with every breath, and you'll breathe it in all night. And tomorrow night, and every night until spring arrives. Medieval peasants had a term for the blackened ceiling beams above the hearth. They were bacon poles, used for smoking and preserving meat. The same smoke that filled their lungs preserved their food. Everything in this world serves double duty. The fire needs almost constant attention. Not frantic attention, no one is frantically doing anything in this room. The pace is too slow for that, but a kind of persistent awareness. Someone is always watching. Someone is always ready to add another log, to blow gently on fading embers, to rearrange the burning wood so it catches properly. In wealthier households, this job might fall to a servant. Here, it rotates among family members, an unspoken shift system developed over years of practice. Even the children know how to tend a fire. Even the children understand that letting it die is not an option, because relighting a fire was genuinely difficult. You didn't have matches. You didn't have lighters. What you had was flint and steel. And if you've never tried to start a fire with flint and steel, you might be imagining it as a quick, easy process: a few sparks, a bit of tinder, and you're done. In reality, it could take minutes of patient striking before a spark caught. Your hands would ache. Your fingers would go numb in the cold. And all the while, the temperature in the cottage would be dropping. Your family would be shivering, and every failed spark would feel like a small defeat. Some families kept their fires burning continuously for months. Some kept them burning for years. The hearth was never truly cold because no one could afford to let it go cold. Historians still argue about fire safety in medieval cottages. The statistics we have are fragmentary, but fires, the uncontrolled kind, were clearly a constant threat. Thatch burns enthusiastically. Wattle and daub. Once it dries out, burns too. And here, you have an open flame in the center of a room made almost entirely of flammable materials, with no fire brigade to call, no running water to douse the flames, nothing but buckets and prayers and the hope that your neighbors would arrive in time to help. Villages burned, towns burned, London burned, more than once, and yet people kept their fires burning anyway because the alternative, the cold, the darkness, the inability to cook food or see your own hands in front of your face was worse than the risk. The woman lifts the pot from the fire now, using a cloth wrapped around her hands to protect them from the heat. The contents bubble and steam tonight's dinner. Such as it is, she ladles it into wooden bowls, and the children stir from their drowsy huddle, suddenly alert at the prospect of food. You'll learn more about what's in those bowls soon enough. For now, you watch the steam rise and curl into the smoke above. Two kinds of warmth meeting and mingling in the air. A man enters through the door you came in earlier, the father, you assume. Though he could be an older brother or an uncle, it's hard to tell ages here. Everyone looks older than they are. He brings a blast of cold air with him, and for a moment the fire shivers, its flames bending sideways before recovering. He carries an armload of wood, and he dumps it near the hearth with the satisfied grunt of someone completing an important task. More fuel. Another night secured. He settles onto the bench beside you, close enough that you can smell the cold still clinging to his clothes, and he stretches his hands toward the flames with an expression that might almost be called contentment. This is the rhythm of winter evenings. The fire is tended, food is prepared, bodies gather close. The darkness outside presses against the walls. But in here, in this small circle of light and warmth, something like peace exists. It's not comfort, not by your standards. The smoke still burns your eyes. The draft still finds your back. But there's a rightness to it, a sense that everything necessary is being done, that the ancient bargain between humans and fire is being honored once again. The flames dance and whisper. The embers glow like tiny fallen stars, and the night stretches out ahead of you, long and dark and cold, held at bay by this small, stubborn miracle of combustion. You understand now why fire was sacred to so many cultures, why it appears in myth and religion and story across every civilization. Fire is life. Fire is survival. And in a medieval peasant cottage in the dead of winter, fire is the only thing standing between you and the void. The fire has warmed you, but the cold hasn't given up. It waits at your back, patient and persistent, finding every gap in your defenses. And that's when you begin to notice what you're wearing. Really notice it, because in this world, clothing isn't fashion. Clothing is architecture. It's the portable shelter you carry on your body. The last wall between your skin and a winter that wants very much to kill you. You look down at yourself and take inventory. The innermost layer, pressed against your skin, is linen. It's rough compared to the cotton you're used to, with a texture like canvas that's been softened by years of wear and washing. This is your undertonic, or what we might call a long undershirt, falling past your knees. If you're a woman, you're wearing a similar garment called a chemise or smock. Either way, it serves the same purpose, absorbing sweat, protecting your outer garments from your body's oils, providing a thin barrier of insulation. Linen breathes, which is useful in summer. In winter, breathing is less of a virtue. You layer over it and hope for the best. The next layer is wool. Wool is everything here. Wool is king. The tunic you're wearing, a simple T-shaped garment that pulls over your head, is made of it. And so are the hose that cover your legs. And so is the hood draped around your shoulders. Wool, when it's wet, still retains warmth, which is more than can be said for most other fabrics. Wool is naturally fire-resistant, which matters when you spend your evenings inches from an open flame. Wool can be felted, woven, knitted into different weights and textures depending on what you need. The sheep that provide it are everywhere in medieval England, grazing on common land, producing fleece that forms the backbone of the entire economy. When historians talk about medieval wealth, they're often talking about wool. But here's the thing about wool that no one mentions in the romanticized versions of this era. It itches. It itches terribly. Especially the coarse homespun wool that peasants wore. Nothing like the soft merino you might find in a modern sweater. That linen undergarment isn't just for cleanliness, it's a barrier between your skin and the relentless scratching of wool fibers. Even so, you get used to it. You have to. The alternative is freezing, and freezing itches worse than any fabric. The woman by the fire is wearing layers too, though hers are slightly different. Her outer garment is a long dress, also wool, with sleeves tight at the wrist to keep the cold from creeping up her arms. Over that, she wears a sleeveless surcoat for extra warmth. Her head is covered, everyone's head is covered. Historians estimate that you lose a significant percentage of body heat through your head. And medieval people understood this instinctively, even without the science. Men wear hoods or simple caps. Women wear veils, wimples, head wraps of various kinds. Bare heads are for summer, for the young, for the foolish. And then there are the cloaks. You're wearing one now, and you're grateful for it, a heavy rectangle of wool, pinned at the shoulder with a simple brooch, falling to your knees or below. A good cloak was worth more than almost anything else a peasant might own. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Cloaks were regularly bequeathed in wills, passed from parent to child, from master to servant, sometimes specified by name or description as if they were members of the family. I leave my great grey cloak to my son Thomas, my best wool mantle to my daughter Agnes. These weren't just garments. They were heirlooms. They were investments. A quality cloak might represent months of spinning, weaving, and finishing countless hours of labor that couldn't simply be replaced. You pull the cloak tighter around yourself and feel its weight settle across your shoulders. It's not elegant. It's not particularly well made by the standards of the nobility, but it's yours, and it's keeping you alive. And in this moment, that's enough. The children are less thoroughly dressed, which seems cruel until you remember that children run hot, that they're constantly moving, that their small bodies generate heat through sheer restless energy. Even so, they have their woolens, their hoods, their small shoes stuffed with straw for insulation. Shoes, that's another thing. Yours are leather, thin leather, with soles that you can feel the ground through. There's no arch support. There's no insulation to speak of. In wet weather, they soak through within minutes. In cold weather, your toes go numb, regardless of what you stuff inside them. Peasants often wrap their feet in cloth before putting on shoes, adding whatever padding they could manage. Some wore wooden pattens, raised platforms that strapped over the shoes to lift them above the mud and wet. Walking was an adventure. Walking in winter was an ordeal. Historians still argue about exactly how much clothing the average peasant actually owned. Inventories from the period suggest that most families had shockingly few garments, perhaps 2 or 3 changes of clothes per person, worn until they literally fell apart. Washing happened, but not frequently. And the labor involved was significant enough that people avoided it when possible. You wore your clothes until they were dirty, and then you wore them a bit longer, and eventually you washed them in water that might or might not be warm, with soap that might or might not be available, and you waited for them to dry, which in winter could take days. The smell of a medieval cottage wasn't just smoke and animals. It was also people who worked hard and sweated freely and didn't have the luxury of daily showers. But we shouldn't be too quick to judge. These clothes were functional. They were appropriate to the lives being lived. A peasant working in the fields didn't need silk or velvet. They needed something durable, something repairable, something that could survive another year of hard use. And wool, for all its itching, delivered on those requirements admirably. A well-made woolen garment could last a decade or more with proper care. Could you say the same about anything in your closet? The man who brought in the firewood earlier is wearing a different kind of outer layer, a rough jacket of sheepskin. The fleece turned inward against his body. It's crude but effective. The original version of the shearling coat that fashion houses would sell for thousands of dollars centuries later. Animal skins and furs were common additions to the peasant wardrobe when available. Though the best furs were reserved for nobility, peasants made do with sheepskin. Rabbit, perhaps the occasional fox if they were lucky. Every bit of warmth counted. Every layer mattered. You shift on the bench, and your clothing shifts with you, the wool rustling, the linen sliding against your skin, the cloak readjusting its drape. It's a small symphony of fabric, a constant reminder that you're wrapped in protection. Outside, the wind has picked up again, and you can hear it probing the walls, searching for entry. But you're insulated now, imperfectly, inadequately, but insulated nonetheless. The clothing holds your heat close, and the fire does the rest. And together they create something almost like comfort. Almost. The cold still finds your ankles where your hose don't quite meet your shoes. It still sneaks down your collar when you move too quickly. But you're learning to live with it. These small invasions, these minor defeats, everyone here has learned the same lesson. The cold doesn't go away. You just get better at coexisting with it. The evening deepens, and the fire settles into a steady glow. The children have finished their meal. You watch them scrape their bowls clean with a thoroughness that spoke of genuine hunger, and now drowsiness is creeping over them like a slow tide. One of them yawns. A wide, unguarded yawn that shows missing teeth and a pink tongue. Another has already slumped against the woman's side. Eyes fluttering between waking and sleep. The day is ending. The night is claiming its territory. And soon, everyone in this cottage will need to find somewhere to lie down. You look toward the back of the room, where that wooden platform waits in the shadows. The bed, though again, bed might be too generous a word. What you're looking at is essentially a large wooden frame, raised a few inches off the earthen floor, just enough to escape the worst of the cold that seeps up from below. Just enough to keep the sleeper separate from whatever might be crawling across the ground in the darkness. The frame is filled with a mattress, and the mattress is filled with straw. You'll be sleeping on that straw tonight, you and everyone else. The mattress rustles as the woman begins preparing the sleeping space. And you hear it before you see it, that distinctive whisper of dried stalks shifting against each other. A sound like secrets being exchanged. Straw was the universal stuffing material for peasant beds. It was cheap. It was available. And it was renewable. Every harvest brought fresh supplies. The old straw could be thrown out and replaced, taking with it some portion of the insects and vermin that had inevitably taken up residence. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The phrase "hitting the hay" comes directly from this practice. Medieval sleepers would literally beat their mattresses before lying down, trying to dislodge any unwanted guests and redistribute the stuffing that had clumped together. You'll be hitting the hay tonight. Everyone does. The smell of the mattress reaches you now dry, dusty, with a faint sweetness underneath that might be the memory of summer fields or might be something less pleasant. Straw holds odors. It holds moisture too, which is why peasant families tried to air their mattresses when weather permitted, dragging them outside on dry days to let the sun work its purifying magic. In winter, that wasn't possible. You slept on whatever the straw had become, and you tried not to think about it too hard. Blankets are being arranged now. Wool again, always wool in various states of age and repair. Some are relatively new, thick and dense. Others are thin with use, their fibers worn down by years of bodies pressing against them. There aren't enough blankets for everyone to have their own, which is fine because no one expects their own blanket. Bedding is shared. Warmth is shared. Everything in this room is shared, and that includes the bed itself. You're about to experience something that modern sensibilities find deeply uncomfortable: communal sleeping. The entire family, father, mother, children, and yes, you, the guest, will sleep together on this single platform, arranged like sardines in a tin, bodies pressed close for warmth. There's no embarrassment about this. There's no awkwardness. This is simply how sleep works in a world where heat is precious and beds are expensive. The children go down first, placed toward the wall where they'll be protected from drafts and from rolling off onto the floor. They curl into each other instinctively, small limbs tangling, breath synchronizing. The woman lies next to them, and the man will take the outside edge, closest to whatever threats might emerge from the darkness. You'll be squeezed in somewhere, occupying whatever space remains, your body heat contributing to the collective warmth of the group. Historians still argue about the social implications of this arrangement. Some suggest that bed sharing fostered a different understanding of privacy and personal space, that medieval people simply didn't have the same psychological boundaries we do, couldn't afford them, and wouldn't have understood our squeamishness. Others point out that the practice was born of necessity rather than preference, that wealthy families who could afford multiple beds often used them, that privacy was a luxury rather than an unknown concept. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. People adapted to their circumstances. They found normalcy in whatever their circumstances demanded. What's certain is that sharing a bed with strangers was not unusual. Travelers staying at inns often found themselves sleeping alongside people they'd never met, sometimes 3 or 4 to a bed, packed tight, regardless of gender or station. The bed was simply a warm place to lie down, and warmth was more important than propriety. You might wake up with someone's elbow in your ribs and someone else's foot against your calf, and you wouldn't complain because complaining would mean sleeping on the floor. And the floor was cold, and cold was the enemy. You lower yourself onto the mattress now, and it crackles beneath your weight. The straw compresses unevenly, creating lumps and hollows that you'll feel all night. The wool blanket is pulled over you, over all of you, and immediately you feel the difference. The shared body heat creates a microclimate under the covers, a pocket of warmth that the fire alone couldn't provide. The child beside you radiates heat like a small furnace. The adults contribute their share. Together, you form something like a human heating system, each body warming its neighbors, the whole greater than the sum of its parts. This is why peasants slept together. Not because they didn't understand privacy, and not because they lacked morality, and not because they were somehow less civilized than we are. They slept together because it worked, because a family huddled under shared blankets could survive a night that might kill them individually, because human warmth is free, and fuel is expensive, and the mathematics of survival don't care about your comfort zone. The fire has been banked now, not extinguished. Never extinguished, but reduced to a low glow that will last through the night. The man added a few careful pieces of wood, arranged to burn slowly, and covered the flames with ash to moderate their consumption. If all goes well, there will still be embers in the morning, enough to coax back into life without the ordeal of starting fresh. The room dims further. Shadows gather in the corners, in the rafters, in the spaces between bodies. Someone coughs. Someone else shifts position, and the straw whispers its response. A child mumbles something unintelligible and falls silent. These are the sounds of a household settling into sleep. The small nocturnal symphony that plays out every night in every cottage across the land. You listen to breathing slow around you. Feel the rise and fall of chests beside your own. Sense the gradual loosening of muscles as consciousness releases its grip. The darkness is nearly complete now. The fire provides just enough light to see vague shapes, to distinguish the wall from the ceiling, to catch the faint glint of eyes if anyone happens to be awake. You are surrounded by warmth, human warmth, animal warmth from somewhere nearby. The lingering warmth of the fire reaching across the room. It's not comfort. The straw pokes at your hip. The air still smells of smoke. But it's survivable. It's sustainable. It's enough. Sleep comes slowly in an unfamiliar place. But it comes. Your eyes grow heavy. Your thoughts begin to drift, losing their edges, blurring into something softer. The breathing around you becomes a kind of rhythm, a lullaby played by lungs and hearts, and you let yourself be carried by it. Let yourself sink into the shared warmth of this strange bed. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, but tonight, you rest. Morning arrives not with light, but with hunger. You wake in the grey half-darkness, the fire reduced to embers, the warmth of the shared bed already fading as bodies begin to stir and separate. Your stomach speaks first, a low, insistent growl that reminds you of something you'd almost forgotten in the drowsy comfort of sleep. You need to eat, and what you're about to eat will test every assumption you've ever made about food. The woman is already up, moving through the dimness with practiced efficiency. She coaxes the fire back to life, those carefully banked embers from last night doing their job, and soon a small flame licks upward, casting flickering shadows across the room. A pot is positioned over the heat, the same pot from dinner. You realize the same contents, more or less. This is breakfast. This is also lunch. This is, in many ways, every meal you'll eat until spring. Welcome to pottage. Pottage is not a recipe so much as a philosophy. It's what happens when you take whatever vegetables you have, whatever grains you can spare, whatever scraps of meat or bone might be available, and you boil them together in water until they become something edible. The base is usually oats or barley, thickened into a porridge-like consistency. To this, you add whatever the season provides: cabbage, onions, leeks, beans, peas. In autumn, the pottage might be rich with root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, the occasional carrot. By February, it's thin and grey and tastes mostly of water and desperation. You accept a bowl now, wrapping your hands around its warmth. The contents are brownish, lumpy, with a texture somewhere between soup and cement. You bring it to your lips and taste. It's bland, aggressively bland. There's salt a little and something that might be an herb, but mostly there's just the earthy, starchy, vaguely vegetal flavor of survival. This is not food designed for pleasure. This is fuel. You eat it because your body requires calories, and calories are what pottage provides. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The pottage pot in many households was never fully emptied. New ingredients were simply added to whatever remained from the previous day, creating a perpetual stew that might contain layers of flavor and bacteria dating back weeks. The phrase potluck may derive from this practice. You ate whatever luck had deposited in the pot. Some days that meant a richer broth, flavored by a bone that still had marrow to give. Other days it meant watery gruel that barely qualified as food. The bread comes next, and you eye it with suspicion. It's dark, almost black in places, with a dense, heavy texture that suggests it could double as a weapon if necessary. This is maslin bread, made from a mixture of wheat and rye, sometimes with barley or oats thrown in depending on what was available. Pure wheat bread was for the wealthy. Peasants ate whatever grains they could grow or afford, mixed together and baked into loaves that would last for days, weeks. If necessary, growing progressively harder until you needed to soak them in pottage just to make them chewable. You bite down and feel your jaw protest. The crust is formidable. The interior is marginally softer, but still requires genuine effort to chew. Your teeth work steadily, breaking down the bread into something your throat can accept, and you find yourself grateful for the pottage that softens each bite. The taste is sour, faintly nutty, with an undertone of something you can't quite identify. Probably better not to ask. Medieval flour often contained additives that would horrify a modern baker, ground peas to stretch the supply. Ergot fungus, if the rye had been infected. Occasionally sawdust if times were truly desperate. The children eat quickly, mechanically, with the focused intensity of small animals who know that food is not guaranteed. They don't complain about the taste. They don't ask for something different. This is simply what food is. They've never known anything else. And by the standards of their world, this meal is adequate. There's enough. That's what matters. Enough to keep bodies moving, hearts beating, warmth generating. Enough to survive another day. Meat is rare. You should understand that now. The salted pork hanging in the corner, you noticed it last night. A dark shape suspended from the rafters represents wealth, planning, sacrifice. A pig was slaughtered in autumn, when it was fat from summer foraging and before winter demanded the grain that would otherwise feed it. The meat was salted heavily, packed in barrels or hung to cure in the smoke that fills the cottage. It will last for months, doled out in small portions. A few precious scraps added to the pottage on special occasions. Today is not a special occasion. Today you eat grain and vegetables, and whatever memories of meat the pot still holds. Historians still argue about the nutritional adequacy of the medieval peasant diet. Some point to skeletal evidence suggesting widespread malnutrition stunted growth, weakened bones, teeth worn down by gritty bread. Others note that the diet, while monotonous, provided most essential nutrients when food was actually available. The problem wasn't the food itself so much as the quantity, especially in late winter when stores ran low and spring crops were still months away. February and March were the killing months, the time when granaries emptied and bodies weakened, and the illnesses that had been held at bay by adequate nutrition finally found their opening. You scrape your bowl clean, chasing the last traces of pottage with the last chunk of bread. Your stomach is no longer growling, but it's not satisfied either. It's simply quiet, temporarily appeased by enough calories to function. You'll be hungry again soon. You'll be hungry, in some low-level, persistent way, until the world warms and the earth begins producing again. The woman is already cleaning up, such as cleaning is possible, with no running water and no soap to spare. The bowls are wiped, stacked, set aside for the next meal. The pot remains on the fire, its contents reduced but not eliminated. Tomorrow's breakfast is already beginning. The cycle continues, endless and unchanging, until something breaks it a feast day, a death, a spring that finally arrives. You think about the meals you've taken for granted, the variety, the abundance, the simple assumption that food would be there when you wanted it, in whatever form you desired. That assumption doesn't exist here. Food is work. Food is worry. Food is the difference between making it through winter and becoming another name that the village remembers only in passing. The bread sits heavy in your stomach, and the day stretches out before you, demanding labor despite the cold, despite the hunger that never quite leaves. But you're alive. You're fed, after a fashion. And in this world, that's enough to call it a good morning. A sound pulls your attention toward the far end of the cottage, a low grunt, followed by the shuffle of hooves against packed earth. You turn, and there they are, the other residents of this household, the ones you've been smelling since you arrived but haven't yet properly met. A pig, 2 chickens, and, in the shadows beyond, the massive, warm bulk of a cow. They live here. With you. With everyone. This is perhaps the detail that surprises modern visitors most. We imagine a clear separation between human space and animal space, between the home and the barn, between us and them. But that separation is a luxury, and luxuries don't survive winter. In a medieval peasant cottage, animals weren't just livestock. They were roommates. They were heating systems. They were, in their own strange way, family. The cow shifts her weight, and you feel the floor vibrate slightly beneath your feet. She's enormous this close, 1,000 pounds of muscle and bone and, most importantly, warmth. A single cow generates roughly the same heat as a small space heater running continuously. In a cottage where every degree matters, that heat is invaluable. The family has arranged the living space accordingly. Humans on one side, animals on the other, with perhaps a low partition of wattle between them. The warmth mingles. The smells mingle too. But you've stopped noticing that your nose surrendered hours ago. The pig is more mobile, rooting around in the straw that covers its section of the floor. Pigs are intelligent animals, more intelligent than dogs. Some researchers suggest, and this one watches you with small, knowing eyes. It's not a pet. No one here has pets. But there's a relationship nonetheless. A mutual dependence that goes beyond simple ownership. The pig will be slaughtered come autumn, its flesh salted and smoked and rationed through the winter. But right now, in January, the pig is alive and warm and contributing its body heat to the collective survival effort. Right now, the pig is useful in ways beyond its eventual death. The chickens occupy a small corner, huddled together in the way chickens do. They provide eggs, not many in winter, when the short days slow their laying, but some, a few precious eggs each week, scrambled into the pottage or eaten alone as a rare treat. The shells are saved too, ground into powder and fed back to the hens to keep their bones strong. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Chicken manure was considered particularly valuable for fertilizing gardens. Nothing that came out of these animals was wasted. Not the dung, not the feathers, not the bones. The medieval economy was circular in ways we've forgotten how to imagine. You watch the woman scatter a handful of grain for the chicken's precious grain, measured carefully from the household's dwindling supply. The birds peck eagerly, their small heads bobbing with mechanical precision. This is investment, not generosity. Every kernel given to the chickens will return as eggs, as meat. As more chickens come spring, the math of survival requires constant calculation, constant weighing of present sacrifice against future return. The cow needs milking, and you observe this process with something like wonder. The woman settles onto a low stool, positions a wooden bucket beneath the udder, and begins the rhythmic squeeze and pull that draws milk from the animal's body. The sound is distinctive, a soft hissing as the streams hit the bucket, building to a foamy splashing as the milk accumulates. The cow stands patiently, chewing her cud, radiating warmth into the cold morning air. Steam rises from the fresh milk, and you can smell it now, rich, warm, faintly sweet beneath the general barnyard odor of the cottage. Milk in winter is different from milk in summer. The cow's diet has changed. She's eating hay now instead of fresh grass. And the milk reflects this, becoming paler, less flavorful. But it's still milk. It's still calories. Still fat. Still protein that growing children desperately need. Some will be drunk fresh. Some will be set aside to separate into cream, which might be churned into butter if there's time and energy for such luxuries. Some will curdle into simple cheese, preserved with salt for the weeks ahead. Historians still argue about how common it was for animals to actually live inside peasant homes. Regional variations were significant in some areas. Separate byres were the norm, even for poorer families, while in others, the longhouse design kept humans and animals under the same roof, but with clear divisions. What's certain is that the practice existed and that it made practical sense. Building one structure is easier than building two. Sharing heat is more efficient than generating it separately. And keeping valuable animals close meant protecting them from thieves, from predators, from the winter itself. The pig grunts again, seemingly satisfied with whatever it found in the straw. You step closer, not too close, because pigs can bite. And this one has no particular reason to trust you and observe its bristled hide, its surprisingly delicate hooves, its constant subtle movement as it investigates its small domain. Medieval pigs were different from modern ones. Leaner, hairier, more like wild boars than the pink, plump creatures we picture today. They were hardy animals, able to forage for themselves through much of the year, converting scraps and acorns and garbage into meat. A family with a pig was a family with insurance, a living larder that would pay out when the time came. The smell is something you've adapted to. Mostly dung. Yes, animal dung. Human dung from the chamber pot in the corner. The accumulated waste of bodies living in close quarters. But also hay, and straw, and wool, and smoke, and the warm animal musk that isn't entirely unpleasant once you stop fighting it. This is what life smells like when life is lived honestly. Without the perfumes and deodorizers and ventilation systems that separate modern humans from the reality of their own biology, you are an animal too. Your body reminds you, you fit here better than you expected. The children have woken fully now, and one of them, the smallest, toddles over to the cow and leans against her flank. The cow doesn't react. She's used to this, used to small bodies seeking her warmth, used to being furniture as much as livestock. The child closes its eyes, just for a moment, and you see something like peace on that small face. This is normal. This is home. The animals are not invaders or inconveniences. They're part of the household, part of the rhythm, part of what makes survival possible. You settle back onto your bench, and the cottage feels different, now fuller, more alive, more complicated than you first understood. It's not just a shelter for humans, it's an ecosystem, a partnership between species, a negotiation between comfort and necessity. The cow breathes, the pig roots, the chickens murmur their small chicken sounds, and the family moves among them, around them, with them, in a dance that has been choreographed by centuries of winters just like this one. The fire crackles, The animals stir, and outside, the cold continues its patient siege, unaware that inside these walls, warmth is being generated not just by flames but by bodies, human and animal alike, sharing what heat they have. The meal is finished. The animals are tended, and now, despite the cold that presses against the cottage walls like a living thing, the day's work begins. Because here is a truth that winter tries to hide beneath its blanket of snow and ice. There is no rest. There is no hibernation for humans. There is only labor, different in character from summer's demands, but no less relentless. The man rises from his place by the fire, and you follow him, not because anyone has asked you to, but because staying behind feels wrong somehow, feels like a violation of the unspoken contract that governs life in this place. Everyone works. Everyone contributes. Even guests. Even strangers. Even confused time travelers who don't quite understand what they've gotten themselves into. You pull your cloak tighter, that same wool cloak that's becoming as familiar as your own skin, and step out into the morning. The cold hits you like a physical blow. After the relative warmth of the cottage, with its fire and its animals and its press of human bodies, the outside air feels almost violent. Your lungs protest. Your eyes water. The moisture in your nose begins to crystallize. And you understand suddenly why medieval people described winter as a season of war. You're not just experiencing cold, you're being attacked by it. But the man is already moving, his breath fogging in great clouds as he walks toward a structure at the edge of the property. A barn, you realize, smaller than the cottage, rougher in construction, but a barn nonetheless. This is where the serious work happens in winter. This is where grain becomes flour, where survival is measured in bushels and stored against the hungry months ahead. Threshing, that's the task today. You've heard the word before. Probably. But you've never really understood what it meant until you see it happening. The grain harvested in autumn wheat. Barley. Rye was cut and bundled and stored in this barn, waiting for the winter months when there was time to process it properly. Now the man takes up a flail, a simple tool consisting of 2 wooden sticks connected by a leather strap, and he begins to beat the bundled stalks against the floor. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The impact separates the edible grain from the inedible chaff, scattering both across the packed earth. It's hard work. You can see the effort in the man's shoulders, in the way his breath comes faster, in the sweat that begins to bead on his forehead despite the freezing air. This is why winter wasn't a season of leisure. This is why the romantic image of peasants sitting idle by the fire is only partially true. The grain doesn't thresh itself. The work waits for no one. You're handed a flail of your own, and you try to imitate what you've seen. The first swing goes wide, accomplishing nothing. The second connects poorly, sending stalks flying in the wrong direction. The man watches without comment, his expression patient. And eventually you find something like a rhythm not graceful, not efficient, but functional. Your arms begin to ache almost immediately. Your back protests the unfamiliar motion. But you keep swinging, keep beating, keep contributing your small portion to the mountain of work that winter demands. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The flail was such a common tool that it became a weapon of peasant rebellions across medieval Europe. When farmers rose against their lords, which happened more often than the powerful liked to admit, they often fought with the tools they knew best. A flail in the hands of someone who'd spent decades swinging it could crack a skull as easily as it separated wheat from chaff. The line between labor and violence was thinner than we might imagine. After threshing comes winnowing, tossing the mixed grain and chaff into the air, so the lighter chaff blows away while the heavier grain falls back into the basket. This requires a breeze, which winter provides in abundance, and a skill that you definitely don't possess. You watch instead as the man performs this ancient dance, his movements economical and precise, the grain accumulating in golden piles while the chaff drifts away like snow. The morning passes in labor. There's water to haul from the well, a well that's frozen over and requires breaking through ice before you can lower the bucket. The water comes up achingly cold, so cold it burns your hands through the rope, and you carry it back to the cottage in wooden pails that slosh and splash against your legs. Your hose are wet now. They'll stay wet for hours, slowly warming against your skin, never quite drying in the damp winter air. There are tools to mend: a hoe with a loose head, a rake missing teeth. The man works with hands that know this labor intimately, fitting wooden pieces together, binding them with strips of leather, testing and adjusting until the tool is functional again. Nothing is thrown away. Nothing is replaced when it can be repaired. The village doesn't have a hardware store. The nearest blacksmith is miles away and charges prices that peasants can rarely afford. You fix what you have, or you go without. Historians still argue about how much leisure time medieval peasants actually enjoyed. Some calculations suggest that feast days, Sundays, and seasonal variations in labor meant peasants worked fewer total hours per year than modern employees. Others point out that work is hard to define when every aspect of life requires effort, when cooking is work, when staying warm is work, when simply existing demands constant vigilance and toil. The truth probably depends on the season. Summer was brutal. Endless days of planting and harvesting and racing against weather. Winter was different, shorter days, longer nights, more time by the fire. But the work never truly stopped. It just changed shape. By midday, your body is exhausted in ways you didn't know were possible. Muscles you've never used are making themselves known. Your hands are raw from the rope, from the flail handle, from the cold that finds every exposed inch of skin. You return to the cottage with the man, and the warmth hits you like a blessing, like a reward for hours of suffering. The fire has been maintained in your absence. The woman saw to that, and you collapse onto your bench with a gratitude that borders on religious. Remember that fire we talked about? The one that commands the room? You understand it differently now. That fire isn't just warmth for warmth's sake. It's recovery. It's the thing that makes tomorrow's labor possible. Without the fire, your muscles would stiffen, your joints would ache, your body would slowly surrender to the cold. The fire gives back what winter takes. The fire is why you can keep going. The pottage is warming again, and soon there will be food, the same food as this morning, the same food as last night, but food nonetheless. Your stomach growls its anticipation. The labor has made you hungry in a way that modern life rarely does. A deep cellular hunger that demands calories, that doesn't care about taste or variety, that simply wants fuel. You'll eat whatever is offered, and you'll be grateful for it. Outside, the afternoon light is already beginning to fade. Winter days are short, cruelly short, and the darkness will return soon. But for now, you rest. For now, the work is paused. For now, the fire crackles and the cottage holds, and your body slowly remembers what warmth feels like. Tomorrow, the work will begin again. You've been here for a day now. Maybe two. Time moves strangely in a world without clocks, without schedules, without the constant digital reminders of modern life. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a thought has been growing. A small, uncomfortable thought that you've been trying to ignore. But it won't stay quiet any longer. You need to wash. Your skin feels grimy. Your hair is lank with oil and smoke. The clothes you're wearing, those wool layers that have kept you alive, are beginning to develop their own distinct character. A smell that belongs to you and you alone. In your normal life, this would be unacceptable. In your normal life, you'd have showered by now. Probably twice. But this isn't your normal life. And washing, you're about to discover, is not the simple thing you've always assumed it to be. The woman notices you scratching at your arm, at the place where wool meets skin and irritation has set in. She says something you don't quite understand, but her meaning is clear enough from context and gesture. She's offering you a chance to clean up. You accept with perhaps too much enthusiasm, and she leads you toward the corner of the cottage where a wooden basin sits, empty and waiting. Water, that's the first problem. You remember hauling it from the well yesterday. Remember the ice that had to be broken, the cold that bit at your fingers through the rope. Every drop of water in this cottage was carried here by human hands. Every drop represents labor, effort, time stolen from other necessary tasks. Water is not something you waste. Water is not something you use casually. When the woman pours a small amount into the basin, maybe a quart, maybe less, you understand that this is a gift. This is generosity measured in ounces. The water is cold. Of course it's cold. Heating water requires fuel, and fuel is precious. And you're not important enough to justify the expense. You dip your hands into the basin and gasp at the temperature. It feels like liquid ice, like the memory of winter concentrated into physical form. But you wash anyway, splashing the water onto your face, rubbing at the grime that's accumulated in the creases of your skin. The cold is shocking at first, then merely painful, then strangely invigorating. Your skin tingles. Your nerves wake up. You feel, for a moment, almost clean. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Medieval people were not as dirty as we often imagine. The stereotype of the filthy peasant who never bathed is largely a myth, perpetuated by later centuries eager to feel superior to their ancestors. In reality, washing was valued, even if it was difficult. Public bathhouses existed in many towns, inherited from Roman tradition and surprisingly popular until concerns about disease and morality began closing them down in the later medieval period. People washed their hands before meals. They washed their faces in the morning. They understood, on some intuitive level, that cleanliness mattered. But understanding and achieving are different things. In winter, in a peasant cottage, with frozen wells and no running water and fuel too valuable to waste on heating bath water, cleanliness became a matter of compromise. You washed what you could, when you could, with what you had available. Full immersion baths were rare, perhaps a few times a year, if that. The rest of the time, you made do with spot cleaning, with the basin and the rag, with the eternal struggle against dirt that never quite ended. Soap exists here, though not in the form you'd recognize. The woman produces a small chunk of something grayish-brown, roughly the size of an egg, and offers it to you. This is soap, real soap, made from animal fat and wood ash, cooked together until they combine into something that will actually lift dirt from skin. It smells faintly of tallow, of rendered animal, of the pig that probably contributed its fat to the mixture. It doesn't lather the way modern soap does. It feels greasy in your hands, almost counterproductive, but it works. After a fashion, It works well enough. You scrub at your face, your neck, the backs of your hands where the grime is most visible. The water in the basin turns grey almost immediately, a testament to just how dirty you've become in such a short time. The woman watches without judgment. She's seen worse. She's been worse. Everyone here has made their peace with a level of dirtiness that would send a modern person running for the shower. Your hair remains untouched. Washing hair in winter is an undertaking that requires more resources than you have access to more water, more time, more fuel to heat the water if you don't want to catch your death from wet hair in freezing temperatures. Medieval women often went weeks between hair washings, keeping their locks covered beneath veils and wimples, partly for modesty, partly for warmth, and partly to hide the oil that accumulated between cleanings. Men kept their hair shorter, generally, which helped. But no one was walking around with the freshly shampooed bounce of a modern shampoo commercial. Historians still argue about medieval attitudes toward bathing. Some emphasize the religious dimension, the idea that excessive attention to the body was a form of vanity, that true Christians should focus on the cleanliness of their souls rather than their skin. Others point to practical medical theories that viewed bathing with suspicion, believing that open pores invited disease. Still others suggest that these concerns were largely elite preoccupations, and that ordinary people bathed when they could simply because being clean felt better than being dirty. The evidence supports all of these views to some degree. Medieval people, like people in any era, held contradictory beliefs and made pragmatic choices. The basin is emptied outside, nothing wasted. The dirty water joining the mud and snow in the yard, and you feel marginally better. Not clean, not by your standards, but cleaner. The layer of grime has been reduced, if not eliminated. Your face feels tighter where the cold water stripped away oils. Your hands are raw but functional. You've achieved what passes for hygiene in this place, and you're oddly proud of the accomplishment. The smell remains. Of course, your clothes haven't been washed, can't be washed. Really. Not without a warm day for drying and a commitment of time and labor that winter doesn't permit. The wool holds onto odors with remarkable tenacity, building a personal archive of everywhere you've been and everything you've done. By spring, you'll smell like smoke and sweat and animal and humanity. Everyone will. It's simply the fragrance of survival. You settle back onto your bench by the fire, and the warmth begins to dry the moisture on your skin. The wash was brief, imperfect, laughably inadequate by modern standards, but it was something. It was an assertion that even here, even now, even in the depths of winter when survival itself seems uncertain, people make the effort to care for themselves, to maintain some standard, however compromised, to remain human in the face of conditions that threaten to reduce everything to pure animal necessity. The fire crackles, the smoke rises, and you sit, slightly cleaner than before, watching the family go about their afternoon, the woman mending a garment, the children playing some quiet game in the corner, the man dozing lightly after his morning's labor. The cottage smells the same as always, smoke and bodies and animals and wool. But somehow, after your small ritual of washing, it bothers you less. You're becoming part of this place. Your smell is joining theirs. The boundaries between guest and household are slowly dissolving in the shared experience of winter. Tomorrow, you'll be dirty again. But tomorrow is tomorrow. Right now, in this moment, you're as clean as circumstances allow. The cough starts in the night. You hear it first as a distant sound, muffled by sleep and darkness. Something your dreaming mind tries to incorporate into whatever narrative it's weaving. But then it comes again, closer, sharper, and you surface into wakefulness with a familiar dread settling in your chest. Someone in the cottage is sick. It's one of the children, the smaller one, the one who leaned against the cow's warm flank just yesterday, seeking comfort from that enormous gentle body. Now the child is curled beneath the shared blanket, shivering despite the warmth of the bodies pressed around her, coughing with a sound that seems too large for such a small frame. The mother is already awake, already hovering, her face tight with worry in the dim glow of the banked fire. This is what winter does. This is what winter has always done. The cold doesn't just make life uncomfortable, it makes life dangerous. It weakens bodies already stressed by inadequate nutrition. It forces people into close quarters where illness spreads like fire through dry thatch. It turns a simple cough into a death sentence, a fever into a farewell. You're witnessing something that happened in every village, every winter, for centuries upon centuries. The arrival of sickness, the beginning of a battle that not everyone would survive. The child coughs again, and you hear the wetness in it now, the congestion that's settled deep in those small lungs. The mother murmurs something soothing, words you can't quite make out, and presses her hand against the child's forehead. Even from where you lie, you can see the answer in her expression. Fever. The heat that comes from inside when the body declares war on invaders it cannot see. Medieval people didn't understand germs. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses, about transmission vectors or immune systems. What they understood was observation, centuries of watching sickness move through communities, noticing patterns, drawing conclusions that were sometimes right and sometimes disastrously wrong. They knew that illness spread between people, which is why some towns attempted quarantines during plague years. They knew that certain conditions seemed to invite disease, which is why miasma theory, the belief that bad air caused sickness, held such powerful sway over medical thinking. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Medieval people often blamed illness on an imbalance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A winter cough indicated excess phlegm, naturally, and treatments focused on restoring balance. This might involve bloodletting, which seems barbaric until you remember that modern medicine still uses controlled bleeding for certain conditions. It might involve dietary changes, herbal remedies, or adjustments to the patient's environment. The logic was wrong, but the impulse to do something, to fight back against the invisible enemy, was profoundly human. The mother rises and moves toward the corner of the cottage where bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters. You noticed them before but didn't think much of them, just another detail in a room full of unfamiliar objects. Now you understand their purpose. This is the household pharmacy, such as it is. Remedies gathered in summer and autumn, dried and stored against the inevitable illnesses of winter. She selects a bundle, crumbles some of it into a cup, and adds hot water from the pot that's always warming by the fire. The smell reaches you sharp, vegetal, vaguely familiar. It might be elderflower, known for treating fevers and respiratory complaints. It might be horehound, used for centuries to ease coughs and clear congestion. It might be something else entirely. A local remedy passed down through generations of women who learned healing the way they learned cooking, by watching, by doing, by remembering what worked and what didn't. The child drinks reluctantly, grimacing at the taste, but drinks nonetheless. What choice is there? Historians still argue about how effective medieval folk remedies actually were. Some dismiss them entirely as superstition, pointing to the many useless or even harmful treatments that persisted for centuries. Others take a more nuanced view, noting that many traditional remedies contained compounds we now recognize as genuinely therapeutic. Willow bark tea, for instance, contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin. Honey has genuine antibacterial properties. Garlic, used medicinally throughout the medieval period, is now known to have antimicrobial effects. The medieval healer might not have understood why something worked, but that didn't always mean it didn't work. The night passes slowly. The child's cough continues, sometimes quiet, sometimes racking her entire body with its force. The family sleeps in shifts. Someone always awake to tend the fire, to offer water, to simply be present in case the worst begins to happen. You drift in and out of consciousness, pulled back each time by that sound, that wet, struggling sound that seems to fill the entire cottage. Morning brings no improvement. If anything, the child seems worse, paler, weaker, her breathing labored in a way that makes your own chest tighten in sympathy. The fever persists. The remedies continue. And now you see something else in the mother's face. Something beneath the worry. Familiarity. She has seen this before. She has nursed children through sickness before, and not all of them survived. The shadow of that knowledge lives in her eyes. Child mortality in medieval England was staggering by modern standards. Historians estimate that somewhere between 30 and 50% of children died before reaching adulthood. Disease was the primary killer: measles, smallpox, whooping cough, influenza, and 100 unnamed ailments that swept through populations with devastating regularity. Winter concentrated these deaths, creating a season of mourning that arrived as reliably as the frost. Every family knew loss. Every parent lived with the understanding that the children playing by the fire today might not be there come spring. The man leaves for his work, the labor doesn't stop. Can't stop. Even when a child lies sick and the cottage settles into a quieter rhythm, the woman sings softly, an old melody without words that seems designed more to soothe herself than the patient. The other children watch from a distance, their faces solemn, understanding more than you might expect. They've seen this too. They know what's at stake. You feel helpless in a way that modern medicine has taught you to resist. Where are the antibiotics? Where are the doctors with their diagnostic tools and their evidence-based treatments? But there's nothing here except herbs and prayers and the stubborn hope that the body will fight its own battle and win. The child is on her own. Really. Her immune system against whatever pathogen has invaded her small body. The remedies might help at the margins. The warmth might give her strength. But ultimately, she will survive, or she won't. And no one in this cottage has the power to guarantee the outcome. The fire crackles. The child coughs. And outside, the winter continues its long siege, indifferent to the struggle happening within these walls. This is the reality that medieval people lived with every year, the knowledge that sickness would come, that death would follow close behind, and that survival was never certain. They didn't have the luxury of expecting health. They didn't have the illusion of control that modern medicine provides. They had only endurance and remedies and each other. The mother dips a cloth into cool water and presses it against the child's forehead. It's such a small gesture, such an ancient one. Mothers have been doing exactly this for thousands of years, offering what comfort they can in the face of forces they cannot control. You watch, and you remember that warmth you felt yesterday, the warmth of the fire, the warmth of the shared bed, the warmth of bodies pressed together against the cold. That warmth means something different now. It's not just comfort, it's love made visible. made tangible, in a world where love is sometimes all you have to offer. The child sleeps, the fever burns, and winter waits, patient as always, to see what spring will bring. The child recovers. It takes 3 days. Maybe 4 time blurs together in this place, but eventually the fever breaks. The cough loosens, and color returns to those pale cheeks. The mother's face loses some of its tightness. The cottage exhales a collective breath of relief. This time, death passed by the door without entering. This time, the family remains whole. You watch the children now with different eyes. Before, they were background figures, small bodies moving through the cottage on errands you didn't fully understand. Now you see them as survivors. Every child who makes it through a medieval winter is a small miracle, a victory against odds that we would find terrifying. These children don't know how lucky they are, or perhaps they do, in some intuitive way that doesn't require statistics or percentages. Perhaps they understand, in their bones, that life is fragile and precious, and not to be wasted. The recovered child is playing now, crouched in the corner with her sibling, engaged in some game that involves pebbles and scratched lines on the earthen floor. Their voices are soft children in peasant cottages learned early to keep their volume low, to avoid disturbing the adults whose labor kept everyone alive. But there's laughter too, quiet bursts of it that punctuate the afternoon like small bells. The sound is startling in its normalcy. After days of coughing and worry, laughter feels almost miraculous. Medieval childhood was different from what we imagine childhood to be. There was no protected sphere of innocence, no extended adolescence, no years of education before the responsibilities of adulthood arrived. Children worked. They worked as soon as they were physically capable, helping with household tasks by age 4 or 5, taking on more substantial chores by 7 or 8, essentially functioning as small adults by their early teens. The line between childhood and adulthood was blurry, permeable, crossed earlier than modern sensibilities find comfortable. But that doesn't mean there was no childhood at all. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Medieval children played with toys that would be recognizable to any modern child. Dolls made of cloth and stuffed with rags, balls of leather filled with dried peas, spinning tops carved from wood, hobby horses' sticks with crude horse heads that children would ride around the yard. The impulse to play is universal, irrepressible, present in every human society, regardless of how harsh the conditions. These children worked, yes, but they also played, whenever they could steal a few moments from the endless demands of survival. Winter offered its own opportunities for play. Snow, when it came, transformed the village into a wonderland, at least for children too young to fully appreciate the dangers it represented. You can imagine them building figures from packed snow, throwing snowballs at each other, sliding down slopes on whatever makeshift sleds they could construct. Ice brought its own amusements. Frozen ponds became skating surfaces, though skating might be too generous a word, more like sliding on leather-soled shoes, hoping not to fall through into the deadly cold water below. The medieval equivalent of ice skates did exist, made from animal bones strapped to the feet, but these were more common in certain regions than others. The children in this cottage are too young for such adventures. Perhaps, or the weather hasn't cooperated. Instead, they play their pebble game, conducting negotiations and competitions in voices too low for you to follow. The rules seem complex, evolving, probably invented fresh each time they sit down to play. Children don't need elaborate equipment to entertain themselves. They need only imagination. And imagination is free. You settle closer to the fire and watch them. And something shifts in your understanding. You've been thinking of this world as harsh, brutal, defined by scarcity and struggle. And it is all those things. But it's also this: two children playing a game on a winter afternoon, their laughter rising like smoke toward the darkened rafters. Life persists. Joy persists. Even in the hardest circumstances, humans find ways to be human. Historians still argue about the emotional lives of medieval parents and children. Some older scholarship suggested that high child mortality rates produced emotional distance, that parents didn't allow themselves to fully love children who might be taken from them at any moment. This view has been largely discredited. Letters, diaries, memorial inscriptions, and literary evidence all point to deep parental love and profound grief when children died. The mother who sat up for 3 nights nursing her sick daughter wasn't emotionally distant. She was terrified and exhausted, and as devoted as any mother in any century. The children's chores resume as the afternoon wanes. The older one, a boy of perhaps 8, is sent to check on the animals, to ensure they have water and fodder, to report back on any concerns. The younger girl, recovered from her illness, but still moving slowly, is tasked with simpler work, gathering the rushes that have been scattered across the floor, stacking kindling by the hearth, keeping the fire fed while the adults attend to heavier labor. These tasks are not optional. The household functions because everyone contributes, and everyone includes the children. You remember your own childhood, probably. The long stretches of unstructured time, the freedom to be bored, to wander, to exist without purpose or responsibility. That kind of childhood didn't exist here, couldn't exist here. The margins were too thin, the stakes too high. A family that didn't make use of every pair of hands, no matter how small, was a family that might not make it through to spring. The children understood this, accepted it, probably never questioned it. This was simply how life worked. But there were compensations. The children in this cottage are part of something, truly part of it, not sheltered from it. They know where their food comes from because they help tend the animals that provide it. They understand the value of warmth because they've helped gather the fuel that creates it. They're not observers of adult life, waiting to participate. They're participants already, with all the dignity and purpose that participation provides. There's something to be said for that, even as we mourn the toys they didn't have, the schools they didn't attend, the childhoods they didn't experience by our standards. The game in the corner concludes someone won, apparently, though you couldn't follow the logic and the children drift toward the fire. The girl climbs onto her mother's lap, still seeking extra comfort after her illness, still needing the reassurance of warm arms around her. The boy sits beside his father, watching the flames, perhaps learning simply by proximity how an adult man holds himself, how he moves, how he exists in the world. Night is falling again. You can see it in the light that seeps through the cracks in the shutters, growing dimmer, bluer, colder. Another evening in the cottage, another round of pottage from the eternal pot, another night of shared sleep and shared warmth, and the shared project of surviving until morning. The children's eyes are growing heavy. The recovered girl yawns that same wide, unguarded yawn you saw days ago, before the sickness came, and nestles deeper into her mother's arms. The boy is fighting sleep, trying to stay awake with the adults, but his head keeps nodding forward, jerking back, nodding again. Soon they'll all be in the bed, piled together against the cold, breathing in rhythm, dreaming whatever dreams medieval children dreamed. You hope those dreams are kind. You hope they're full of snow games and pebble victories and summer days that feel impossibly distant right now. You hope that somewhere in those small sleeping minds, there's a place where winter can't reach, where sickness doesn't come, where warmth is guaranteed and laughter never has to be quiet. The fire dims, the children sleep, and winter continues its patient work outside, counting the days until spring in a language only the earth understands. A knock at the door, not loud, not urgent, but deliberate, the sound of someone expected. The man rises from his place by the fire and lifts the latch, and cold air rushes in along with two figures, bundled so thoroughly in wool and hood that they're barely recognizable as human. Neighbors. You realize, the family from the cottage you passed on your first evening here. The one with smoke curling from its roof like a question mark against the grey sky. They've brought something. A jug. Ceramic. Stoppered with cloth. And a bundle wrapped in rough linen that smells, even from across the room, of something richer than pottage. The woman of the house accepts these offerings with a nod that contains entire conversation's gratitude, acknowledgement, the understanding that this gift will be repaid in kind when circumstances allow. No money changes hands. No formal transaction occurs. This is something older than commerce. This is community. The newcomers settle by the fire, and the cottage that felt adequate for one family now feels crowded with two. But it's a good crowding, a warm crowding. More bodies mean more heat. More voices mean more distraction from the howling darkness outside. The jug is opened ale. You discover. Home-brewed and slightly sour, but warming as it slides down your throat. The bundle reveals cheese. Real cheese. Harder and saltier than anything you've tasted, but unmistakably, wonderfully. Not pottage. This is how medieval villages survived winter. Not as isolated households, each struggling alone against the cold, but as networks of mutual dependence. The family that had extra ale this month might need extra grain next month. The household with a sick child might receive help from neighbors who would expect help in return when their own children fell ill. Nothing was written down. No contracts were signed. But everyone understood the rules. And everyone understood the consequences of breaking them. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The word neighbor itself comes from Old English near geba, meaning near dweller. The concept was geographic before it was social. Your neighbor was simply whoever lived near you. And that proximity created obligations that couldn't be ignored. You couldn't choose your neighbors the way you might choose your friends. You were stuck with them, and they with you. And so you learned to cooperate because cooperation was survival. The evening settles into a rhythm you're beginning to recognize. The fire crackles. The ale circulates. And slowly, gradually, someone begins to talk. Not about practical matters, not about grain stores or animal health or the repairs that need doing, but about something else entirely. A story. The neighbor who arrived with the cheese is speaking now, his voice low and rhythmic, and the cottage falls silent to listen. The story is old. You can tell by the way he tells it. The phrase is worn smooth by repetition. The pauses that fall in practiced places. It's about a knight, or maybe a saint. The categories blur together in medieval narrative, and a journey through a forest in winter. There are dangers, wolves, bandits, a supernatural cold that freezes men where they stand. There are miracles, a fire that appears from nowhere, a stranger who offers shelter, a morning that arrives against all odds. You don't follow every detail. The dialect is thick. The reference is unfamiliar, but you understand the shape of it. The purpose. This is a story about surviving winter. This is a story these people tell themselves to remember that survival is possible. Historians still argue about the role of storytelling in medieval peasant life. We have fragments, folk tales collected centuries later, references in church documents, occasional transcriptions by literate observers, but the living tradition is lost to us. What we know is that long winter evenings demanded something to fill them. No books. For most people, no written entertainment of any kind. Just voices in the darkness, spinning narratives from memory and imagination, passing down wisdom disguised as adventure. The children are listening, eyes wide despite their tiredness. Remember the little girl who was sick just days ago? She's pressed against her mother now, thumb in her mouth, completely absorbed in the story. This is how culture transmits itself. This is how values and warnings and hopes pass from generation to generation. Not through schools or books, but through nights like this one, gathered around fires, listening to voices that carry the weight of centuries. The story ends, the night survives. The saint performs the expected miracle. Morning comes, and there's a moment of satisfied silence. Then another voice picks up, offering a different tale. And the evening continues. The ale is finished. The cheese is reduced to crumbs, carefully collected and consumed. But no one moves to leave. The fire is warm. The company is good. And outside the wind has picked up, rattling the shutters with renewed determination. Isolation in winter could kill you, not just through cold or hunger, though those were real enough dangers, but through something harder to name, a wearing down of the spirit, a loss of the will that kept you chopping wood and hauling water and tending fires day after day. Community provided more than material support. It provided reason. It reminded you that you weren't alone, that others were fighting the same battle, that your survival mattered to people beyond yourself. The neighbor family leaves eventually, wrapped again in their wool and hoods, disappearing into the darkness between cottages. They'll be back, or this family will visit them. The exchange will continue all winter. A circulation of resources and company that keeps everyone just slightly more alive than they would be alone. You watch them go. Watch the door close behind them. Watch the cold retreat to its proper place outside the walls. The cottage feels emptier now, quieter, but not lonely. The visit left something behind, warmth that isn't just physical, a sense of connection that lingers like the smell of ale and cheese. The family settles back into their evening routine, preparing for bed, banking the fire, conducting the small rituals that separate waking from sleeping. You think about the neighbors you have in your own time, the ones you wave to but rarely speak with, the ones whose names you might not even know, the ones separated from you by walls and hedges and the assumption that everyone takes care of themselves. Something has been lost. You realize something that these people, for all their hardship, still possess. The fire dims. The family gathers in the shared bed. And somewhere in the darkness, in the cottage next door and the cottage beyond that, other families are doing the same thing, lying down, drawing close, surviving together the way humans have survived together for thousands of years. Winter is easier when you don't face it alone. The days have blurred together, an endless grey rhythm of labour and rest, fire and cold, pottage and sleep. You've lost track of time in a way that would be impossible in your own world, where calendars and clocks and glowing screens constantly remind you of where you stand in the march of minutes. But here, time moves differently. Time is measured in firewood consumed and grain remaining. Time is the slow arc of the sun across a winter sky, rising late and setting early. offering only a few precious hours of pale light. And then, one morning, something changes. The cottage stirs earlier than usual. The woman is moving with purpose, pulling bundles from storage, setting aside items that haven't been touched in weeks. The children sense it too. There's an energy in the air, a suppressed excitement that cuts through the monotony of winter survival. You don't understand at first, and then you do. Christmas is coming. The church structured medieval time in ways we've largely forgotten. The year wasn't just a cycle of seasons, it was a cycle of holy days, saints' feasts, and religious obligations that gave meaning to the passage of months. And Christmas, the celebration of Christ's birth, was the great light in the darkness of winter. Not just a day, but a season, stretching from Christmas Eve through Epiphany, 12 days of relative festivity in a world that offered few opportunities for celebration. The preparations you're witnessing are modest by any standard. This family doesn't have money for elaborate gifts or ingredients for fancy dishes, but they have something: a small store of wheat flour saved specifically for this occasion, a portion of the salted pork that's been rationed so carefully all winter, perhaps some dried fruit or honey that represents genuine luxury. Christmas means eating differently, eating better, even if better still seems meager by your standards. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. The tradition of the Christmas feast was taken seriously even by the poorest families. Lords were expected to provide special meals for their tenants, and the church encouraged generosity during this season. For peasants who spent most of the year on the edge of hunger, Christmas offered something rare and precious: the experience of being full, truly full, stomach stretched with food, body warm with ale, spirit lifted by the knowledge that tonight, at least, survival wasn't a question. The village church will be central to the celebration. You haven't visited it yet. It stands at the edge of the village, a stone structure that seems impossibly solid compared to the wattle and daub cottages surrounding it. But you'll go tonight. You understand. Everyone will go. The midnight mass is not optional. Not really. It's the beating heart of the Christmas celebration. The moment when the entire community gathers in one place, united by faith and cold and the shared hope that spring will eventually return. Religion in medieval peasant life was different from what we might imagine. It wasn't just belief, though belief was certainly present. It was structure. The church told you when to work and when to rest. It marked births and deaths, marriages and holy days. It explained suffering as divine purpose and offered hope of reward in the world to come. For people whose lives were hard and often short, this framework provided something essential: meaning. The cold wasn't random cruelty. It was part of a larger story. A story in which their endurance mattered, their suffering counted, their faith would be rewarded. Historians still argue about the depth of medieval religious devotion. Some emphasize the genuine piety that permeated daily life, the prayers said at morning and evening, the saints invoked for protection, the deep belief in a supernatural world that interpenetrated the natural one. Others point to evidence of skepticism, of ritual performed by rote without inner conviction, of a gap between official church teaching and actual popular practice. Both perspectives contain truth. People are complicated. Faith is complicated. The peasant, crossing herself before entering the church, might be experiencing profound spiritual connection, or simply doing what everyone has always done. Probably both. In different moments. The afternoon passes in preparation. The cottage is cleaned not thoroughly, not by modern standards, but more carefully than usual. Fresh rushes are scattered on the floor. The best blankets are brought out from storage. There's a sense of occasion, of marking this day as different from all the others that have come before. Even the children seem to understand, moving through their chores with unusual focus. As darkness falls, the family dresses in their best clothes, which is to say, their least worn clothes, the garments saved for exactly these occasions. The woman wears a cleaner wimple. The man has a cloak that's slightly less patched than his everyday one. The children are scrubbed and straightened and warned to behave. You smooth your own borrowed garments and prepare to follow. The walk to the church is cold, bitterly cold. But you're not alone. Other families emerge from other cottages. Other figures moving through the darkness toward the same destination. Torches flicker here and there. Small islands of light in the vast winter night. Voices call greetings. Subdued but warm. The community is gathering, drawn together by tradition older than anyone living can remember. The church, when you reach it, is transformed. Candles burn in quantities you haven't seen since arriving in this time, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, their flames creating a golden warmth that seems almost miraculous after the dim firelight of the cottage. The stone walls, usually cold and forbidding, seem to glow. Greenery has been brought in holly and ivy, their leaves dark and glossy in the candlelight. The smell of incense mingles with wood smoke and melting wax, and the collective breath of everyone present. You find a place to stand, there are no pews. Not in this era. Just open floor where the congregation gathers and the service begins. Latin words wash over you. Incomprehensible but somehow comforting in their ancient rhythm. The priest moves through rituals unchanged for centuries. Around you, heads bow and lips move in familiar prayers. Responses learned in childhood and never forgotten. The meaning settles over you slowly. Not in the words, but in the feeling. These people have walked through darkness to reach this place. They have endured cold and hunger and sickness and fear. And now they stand together, surrounded by light, affirming that the darkness will not last forever. That spring will come. That hope is reasonable. That they are not alone. The Mass ends. The congregation disperses into the night. But something has shifted in the village. In the family. In you. The long dark of winter has been broken. Just slightly. By this gathering of flames and voices. Tomorrow the cold will return. The work will resume. The struggle will continue. But tonight, for a few hours, something transcended survival. The family walks home in silence. But it's a comfortable silence, full of something that might be peace. The Christmas feast has passed, leaving behind the memory of full stomachs and candlelit warmth. But now, in the quiet days that follow, your mind wanders somewhere it hasn't gone before. Beyond the village, beyond the fields and forests you've glimpsed from the cottage door, to a place you've heard mentioned in passing, spoken of with a mixture of resentment and resignation. The manor house, the lord's estate, the place where winter wears a different face entirely. You haven't been there. Peasants don't simply visit the manor for curiosity's sake, but you can imagine it. Piecing together details from overheard conversations and the universal human tendency to measure one's own circumstances against those of others. And what you imagine is a different world, not a different season. Exactly, but a different experience of the same cold, the same darkness, the same months of endurance. The Lord's Hall has fireplaces, real fireplaces, built into the walls, with chimneys that carry smoke up and away instead of letting it pool beneath the rafters. Multiple fireplaces, perhaps one in the great hall, one in the private chambers. Heat distributed throughout the structure in ways this peasant cottage can only dream of. The Lord doesn't wake with soot in his lungs. The Lord doesn't spend his evenings with stinging eyes and a persistent cough. The Lord breathes clean air while servants tend flames he never has to touch. The food is different too. While you've been eating pottage endless, monotonous pottage, the Lord's table has held roasted meats, white bread made from pure wheat flour, imported spices that cost more than a peasant family earns in a year, wine instead of ale, sugar instead of honey, fresh fish from stocked ponds, kept alive until the moment of preparation. The Lord doesn't know the gnawing anxiety of watching grain stores dwindle. The Lord doesn't calculate how many days of hunger lie between now and the first spring harvest. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Medieval nobility sometimes ate so differently from peasants that their very bones tell the story. Skeletal analysis reveals that upper-class individuals often consumed more protein, more varied nutrients, suffered fewer periods of malnutrition. They were taller, on average, healthier. They lived longer. The inequality wasn't just social or economic, it was biological, written into the bodies of rich and poor alike. The Lord wears furs, not sheepskin or rabbit, the humble furs that peasants might acquire, but ermine and marten and fox, the pelts of animals hunted for sport in forests where peasants cannot legally set foot. His cloak is lined with these treasures, soft against his skin, holding warmth with an efficiency that wool can only approximate. His boots are thick leather, properly fitted, stuffed with fur rather than straw. When the Lord walks outside, which he rarely needs to do, the cold is an inconvenience rather than an assault. And the labor, this is perhaps the sharpest contrast of all. The Lord doesn't thresh grain or haul water or break ice from frozen wells. Servants perform these tasks. An entire household of people whose job is to ensure the Lord's comfort. The Lord's winter is filled with different concerns managing estates, settling disputes, entertaining guests, perhaps reading if he's educated, hunting if the weather permits. His hands remain soft, his back remains straight. His body doesn't carry the accumulated damage of decades of physical work. You think about the man in this cottage, the one who rises each morning to labor regardless of cold or exhaustion. His hands are rough as tree bark. His joints ache in the damp. By 40, he'll move like a man of 60, worn down by a lifetime of demands that nobility never face. The same winter falls on both of them, the same snow, the same frost, the same bitter winds, but they experience it in ways so different they might as well be living in separate worlds. Historians still argue about the nature of medieval inequality. Some emphasize the reciprocal obligations that theoretically bound lord and peasant protection in exchange for labor, justice in exchange for loyalty. Others point out how often these obligations were honored in the breach, how power flowed only one direction, how the system served those at the top while those at the bottom merely survived. The family in this cottage doesn't debate political theory. They simply live the reality. And they have less. And that's how it has always been. But resentment is a luxury too, in its own way. The energy required to be angry about injustice is energy diverted from the work of survival. And so peasants developed other strategies: acceptance, resignation, the quiet satisfaction of their own small pleasures. The Lord might have furs, but the peasant has this fire. These children, this community that gathers in dark evenings to share stories and ale. The Lord might have feasts, but the peasant knows the particular joy of a full stomach after weeks of hunger, a joy that those who are always full can never experience. You watch the family now, the mother mending by firelight, the father dozing after his day's work, the children playing their quiet games in the corner, and you see something the Lord might not recognize. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Not comfort, certainly. But a kind of peace that comes from knowing your place. Understanding your world. Accepting what cannot be changed. These people don't expect luxury. They don't dream of ermine cloaks or white bread. They dream of enough. Enough food to last until spring. Enough wood to keep the fire burning. Enough health to see another year. Perhaps that's the deepest difference between the Lord's winter and the peasant's winter. Not the furs or the food or the fireplaces, but the expectations. The Lord expects comfort and feels aggrieved when it's imperfect. The peasant expects hardship and feels grateful when it's survivable. Both are trapped in their perspectives, unable to truly understand how the other experiences the same cold months. The fire crackles. The wind presses against the walls. Somewhere, miles away, a lord sits in a warm chamber, drinking wine, perhaps thinking about the peasants who work his land, or perhaps not thinking about them at all. And here, in this cottage, a family that will never meet, that Lord continues its quiet struggle, unaware that their endurance is remarkable, their survival an achievement, their simple presence in this harsh world a kind of victory. The same winter, different worlds. The cold doesn't distinguish between rich and poor, but everything else does. The winter you've been experiencing is hard. You know that now. In your bones, in your aching muscles and your smoke-filled lungs. But it's survivable. The grain stores are holding. The fire keeps burning. The family around you, though tested by sickness and cold and the endless labor of endurance, remains intact. This is a normal winter. Difficult, but manageable. This is what peasants expected, prepared for, understood. But some winters were not normal. Some winters broke the rules. Some winters killed. The old man from the neighboring cottage mentioned it once. During one of those evening visits, when stories were exchanged alongside ale, his voice dropped lower. His eyes grew distant. And he spoke of a year when the rain wouldn't stop. Not winter rain, summer rain. Spring rain. Rain that fell when the sun should have been shining and crops should have been growing. The harvest failed. And then it failed again the following year. And then again. 3 years of failure. 3 years of watching grain rot in flooded fields, while hunger tightened its grip on every village in England. The Great Famine. It began in 1315 and didn't truly end until 1322. Historians estimate that 10 to 15% of the population died, some say more. In certain regions, entire villages were abandoned, their inhabitants dead or fled, their cottages left to collapse back into the earth from which they'd been built. This wasn't ordinary winter hardship. This was catastrophe on a scale that medieval people had no framework to understand. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. During the Great Famine, the price of wheat increased by 800% in some areas. 800%. Imagine the family in this cottage facing those numbers. Imagine watching your grain stores empty, knowing that replacement was impossible, that the market held nothing you could afford, that the hunger gnawing at your children's bellies would only grow worse. Some families sold everything they owned. Some sold their land. Some, the records suggest, sold their children into servitude rather than watch them starve. The winters during those famine years were especially cruel. Bodies weakened by hunger had no reserves to fight the cold. Illnesses that might have been survived became death sentences. The old and the young died first, as they always do. But then the dying spread to those who should have been strong enough to endure. Peasants ate things they would never normally consider bark, roots, the leather of their own shoes. There are accounts, disputed but persistent, of darker choices still. Desperation erases the boundaries we think are permanent. You look at the family around you and try to imagine them in such a time. The children growing thinner week by week, the mother's face hollowing as she gives her portions to others, the father's strength failing as his body consumes itself for fuel, the cottage growing colder as no one has energy to gather wood, the fire dying, the hope dying with it. But the family in this cottage exists because someone survived. That's the thing about catastrophe, it doesn't kill everyone. Someone always makes it through, carrying the memory forward, passing the warning to future generations. The old man who told the story learned it from his grandfather, who lived through those terrible years, who buried family members and neighbors and still somehow kept breathing. The survival instinct runs deep, deeper than hunger, deeper than cold, deeper than despair. Other winters entered village memory for different reasons. The winter of 1407 to 1408, when the Thames froze so solid that markets were held on the ice, that people walked from bank to bank as if the river had never existed. The winter of 1434 to 1435, remembered across Europe for its brutal cold, when wolves driven by hunger attacked travelers on frozen roads. These winters became reference points, ways of measuring present hardship against past extremes. This is cold. Someone might say, but it's not like the winter my grandmother described. Historians still argue about climate patterns in the medieval period. The medieval warm period gave way, gradually, to what's called the Little Ice Age, a cooling trend that began around the 14th century and lasted for hundreds of years. Winters grew longer, growing seasons shortened. The margin between survival and death, always thin, became thinner still. Peasants adapted as best they could, but adaptation has limits. When the earth itself turns hostile, human ingenuity can only do so much. The family doesn't speak of these things often. Why would they? The work of survival demands focus on the present, not the past. But the knowledge is there, inherited like the cottage itself, like the tools and the traditions and the understanding of how to coax fire from reluctant embers. Winter can kill. Winter has killed. And every year, when the frost arrives, the question hangs unspoken in the smoky air. Will this be a normal year? Or will this be one of the bad ones? You understand now why the grain is rationed so carefully, why the firewood is stacked so high, why the salted meat is doled out in portions so small they seem almost cruel. These aren't habits born from mere prudence, they're habits born from ancestral memory of what happens when stores run out too soon. The family is planning for the worst because the worst has happened before and could happen again. Hope for a normal winter. Prepare for catastrophe. That's the only rational approach when your survival depends on decisions made months in advance. The fire burns low, and someone, the mother, moving quietly, adds another piece of wood. Such a small gesture, such an ordinary act, but you see it differently now. That wood represents planning, labor, foresight. That wood is the difference between warmth and cold, between survival and the slow slide toward death. The family has enough wood, they have enough grain, they have enough, for now, of everything essential. This winter will not be one of the killers. Outside, the wind continues its endless circuit around the cottage walls. The same wind that blew during the Great Famine. The same wind that froze the Thames solid. The same wind that will blow long after this family and their children and their children's children have returned to the earth. Winter doesn't remember. Winter doesn't learn. Winter simply arrives. Year after year. And humans endure or they don't. The children are sleeping now. Small shapes beneath shared blankets, breathing the slow breath of exhausted peace. They don't know about the Great Famine. They don't know about frozen rivers and desperate choices. They know only this: the fire is warm. Their bellies are reasonably full, and morning will come. That's enough knowledge for now. The harder truths will find them eventually, as they find everyone. But not tonight. Tonight, they sleep, and the cottage holds, and the winter outside remains for now a normal one. Survivable, endurable, another season to be outlasted rather than a catastrophe to be mourned. The fire crackles softly, the wind sighs, and the long night continues its patient march toward dawn. Something is different. You notice it first in the light, a subtle shift, barely perceptible, but real nonetheless. The mornings come earlier now. The grey dawn creeping through the cracks in the shutters a few minutes sooner than it did a week ago. The afternoons stretch slightly longer before darkness reclaims the world. The sun, that distant cold companion, hangs a little higher in the sky at midday. Winter is not over, but winter has begun to loosen its grip. The family notices too. You see it in the way the man pauses at the doorway, looking toward the horizon with an expression you haven't seen before. Hope, cautious, fragile, easily crushed, but hope nonetheless. The days are lengthening. The earth is beginning its slow turn toward warmth. Somewhere beneath the frozen ground, something is stirring, preparing for resurrection. February, the month that medieval people called the hunger month, the gap month, the time when winter stores ran lowest and spring harvest remained impossibly distant. You've felt the portions shrinking over the past weeks. The pottage has grown thinner, more water than substance. The bread is rationed more carefully. The salted pork, that precious reserve you remember from your first nights in the cottage, is nearly gone. The family is not starving, not yet. Not truly, but they are hungry in a way that has become constant. A background ache that never quite fades. Here's a curious detail historians love to mention. Medieval calendars often depicted February with images of people warming themselves by fires or sitting idle, as if the month offered rest. The reality was precisely opposite. February was when the real test began. The body, weakened by months of cold and inadequate nutrition, faced its greatest challenge just as hope was appearing on the horizon. The finish line was visible, but the final stretch was often the deadliest. The thaw, when it comes, will bring its own dangers. Snowmelt will turn paths to rivers of mud. Frozen streams will overflow their banks. The cottage that has kept you alive all winter will suddenly feel damp in new ways. Moisture rising from the earth, seeping through walls that have held firm against frost. Disease often spiked during thaw times, as if illness had been waiting for the ice to release it. The transition between seasons was not a celebration, it was another ordeal to be survived. But the family is watching for signs nonetheless. Small signs, easy to miss if you don't know what to look for. The behavior of birds, are they returning from wherever they spent the darkest months? The texture of the ice on the water bucket, is it thinner now? Quicker to form but quicker to break? The smell of the air itself, carrying hints of something that isn't just cold, something that whispers of change. These observations aren't superstition. They're the accumulated wisdom of generations who survived by paying attention to the world around them. The children sense the shift too, though they couldn't articulate it. They're more restless now, more eager to venture outside despite the lingering cold. The cottage that was a refuge in January has become slightly confining in February. Small bodies want to move, to run, to escape the smoky dimness that has defined their world for months. Soon, you think, soon they'll be able to play in the mud instead of dreaming about it. Soon, the world will open up again. Historians still argue about how medieval peasants experienced the psychological weight of winter. Some suggest that seasonal depression, what we might call sad today, was simply accepted as part of life. Unnamed, but understood. Others point to the religious calendar as a kind of therapy. The festivals and feast days providing structure and light in the darkness. The truth is probably both and neither. People adapted. People endured. People found ways to carry themselves through the tunnel toward the light they knew was waiting at the other end. You think about the journey you've taken. Remember that first evening, stepping into the frozen village as twilight fell. The smoke that burned your eyes. The strangeness of this world that seemed designed to defeat you. You've learned so much since then. You've slept in the shared bed, eaten the endless pottage, felt the warmth of animals and neighbors and the stubborn fire that never quite went out. You've watched a child fall sick and recover. You've witnessed the quiet rituals of Christmas and the quieter rituals of ordinary days. You've understood, in a way that books could never teach you, what survival actually meant for the people who lived this life. The fire crackles beside you, that same fire, or its descendant, the flames that have been coaxed and maintained through all these weeks. Remember how we talked about the importance of never letting it die? The family has kept their promise. The fire burns still, lower perhaps than it did in the deepest cold, but burning nonetheless. It will burn through the thaw and into spring, its purpose shifting from desperate necessity to comfortable convenience. But it will never be taken for granted. This family knows too well what cold means to ever forget the value of warmth. The woman is at her work, mending garments that have seen hard use through the winter months. The stitches will hold through spring planting, through summer labor, through another autumn harvest. She works by the light from the door, which now stands open a crack, something that would have been unthinkable in January. The air that enters is cold but not bitter, bearable, almost pleasant. The cottage is breathing differently now, exhaling the staleness of months of confinement. Evening comes, as it always does, but it comes later now. The family gathers for their meal, thin pottage, careful portions, the last stretches of winter stores, and there's something different in the atmosphere. Not celebration, not yet, but anticipation, the sense that an ending is approaching, that the story is nearing its final pages. They've made it this far. They'll make it the rest of the way. The worst is behind them. Probably, hopefully, almost certainly, the children fall asleep more easily tonight. Perhaps they're dreaming of spring, of green fields and warm sun, and the freedom to run without layers of wool weighing them down. Perhaps they're dreaming of nothing at all, their small bodies finally releasing the tension that winter demands. You watch them breathe. These survivors, these descendants of survivors, and you feel something that might be pride, though you've done nothing to earn it. The fire dims, the cottage settles, and outside, invisible but undeniable, the world is preparing to transform itself once again. The seeds are waiting beneath the soil. The animals are sensing the change. The sun is climbing, degree by degree, toward its summer strength. Winter is not over, but winter is ending, and ending. After all these weeks, feels like the most beautiful word in any language. The fire burns low tonight. Not from neglect, never from neglect, but from intention. The nights are warmer now, or at least less cold, and the fuel that was so precious in January can be conserved for whatever needs remain. The flames have settled into a gentle rhythm, orange and gold dancing slowly across the embers, casting soft shadows on walls that have sheltered this family through another winter. You watch the fire the way you might watch a trusted friend preparing to leave. It has given so much. It has asked for so little in return. Just fuel and attention. Just the promise that it would not be forgotten. You've been here for weeks now. Or what feels like weeks. Time has lost its sharp edges in this place where clocks don't exist, and days are measured by light and labor rather than hours and minutes. But something tells you that your journey is ending. The same instinct that brought you to this frozen village is now whispering of departure, of return, of the modern world waiting somewhere beyond the boundaries of this experience. Soon you'll leave. Soon this cottage, this family, this winter will become memory. But not yet. Tonight, you're still here. Tonight, the fire still burns. And tonight, you understand something that you couldn't have understood before you lived it. Warmth is not given. Warmth is earned. The family around you has taught you this without ever speaking the lesson aloud. Every flame in that hearth represents wood that was gathered, carried, stacked, dried. Every degree of heat represents someone's decision to rise in the cold darkness and tend the fire rather than let it fade. The warmth you feel right now, pressing gently against your face and hands, is the product of countless small choices, each one a victory against the cold that waits eternally outside these walls. And it's not just physical warmth, the warmth of the shared bed, bodies pressed together through long nights, the warmth of neighbors arriving with ale and cheese and stories, the warmth of the mother's hand on a sick child's forehead, of the father's quiet presence, of the children's laughter even in the darkest weeks. All of it earned, all of it cultivated through effort and attention and the stubborn refusal to let cold, any kind of cold, have the final word. Here's what medieval peasants understood that we have largely forgotten. Comfort is not the natural state of existence. Comfort is an achievement, built daily from materials that must be gathered, maintained, protected. We live now in a world where warmth arrives at the push of a button, where food appears on shelves, where survival requires so little conscious effort that we've forgotten it requires effort at all. We've lost something in that forgetting. Not just gratitude, though gratitude is part of it. We've lost the understanding that every good thing must be earned, that ease is the fruit of labor, that the warmth we take for granted was purchased by someone's struggle. The children are sleeping now, as they sleep every night, curled together under shared blankets. Their breathing is slow and even, the rhythm of bodies completely surrendered to rest. They don't know how remarkable their survival is. They don't know that in other years, in other villages, children just like them didn't make it through to spring. They know only that they're warm and full enough and safe. That's enough knowledge for now. That's enough for any child. The mother and father have settled too, their day's work complete, their bodies claiming the rest they've earned. The cottage is quiet in that particular way that speaks of peace rather than emptiness. The animals breathe in their corner. The fire whispers its ancient language. The wind outside has gentled, as if winter itself is growing tired, ready to yield to the season that follows. You think about everything you've witnessed, The smoke-filled mornings, the endless pottage, the shared labor and shared warmth and shared worry when sickness came. The way community gathered around this family like another layer of protection. The faith that marked dark December with candlelight and song. The contrast between this cottage and the Lord's manor, between those who had much and those who had just enough. The shadow of famines past and the hope of springs to come. All of it connected. All of it part of a single story that stretches back centuries before this night and will continue long after. You're just a visitor here, a guest in a world that isn't your own. But for these weeks, you've been part of it. You've breathed the smoke and eaten the pottage and felt the cold that never quite let go. You've earned your warmth in your own small way. And that earning has changed something in you. The fire dims further. The embers glow like memories, holding heat but releasing it slowly, gradually, into the quiet air. Your eyes are heavy now. The sleep that has been gathering at the edges of your consciousness is finally ready to claim you. You don't fight it. There's nothing left to fight. The winter has been survived. The family is whole. The morning will bring new light, new possibilities. The first true hints of the spring that's been waiting so patiently beneath the frozen earth. You close your eyes. The cottage holds you like cupped hands, gentle and secure. The darkness behind your eyelids is not the threatening darkness of winter nights, it's the soft darkness of rest, of release, of letting go. You've done what needed to be done. You've endured what needed to be endured. Now there's nothing left but sleep. Let yourself drift now. Let the edges of wakefulness soften and blur. The fire is dimming, its warmth spreading through the cottage like a slow exhale. And you are safe here. You are warm. You are held by walls that have stood against winter and won. The sounds around you are gentle. The soft crackle of embers settling, the quiet breath of sleeping children, the distant whisper of wind that no longer threatens, that only sings the old songs of passing seasons. These sounds are not asking anything of you. They are simply present, simply real, simply part of this moment that asks nothing but your surrender. Your body is heavy now, pleasantly heavy, sinking into the warmth beneath you. The straw rustles softly as you settle deeper. The wool blanket rests across your chest like a kind hand. And you remember all the hands that made it, the shepherd who tended the sheep, the spinner who drew the thread, the weaver who worked the loom. So many lives woven into this simple comfort. So much care, passed down through generations. Arriving at last to hold you in this quiet night. The journey has been long. You walked through frozen villages and smoke-filled cottages. You felt the bite of cold and the ache of hunger. You watched sickness come and go. You learned what it means to survive, truly survive, in a world that offers no guarantees. And now the journey is ending. Softly, gently, like a story closing its final pages. Spring is coming. You can feel it in the air, in the subtle warmth that lingers even as the fire fades. The earth is stirring beneath its blanket of frost. Seeds are dreaming of sunlight. The world is preparing to be reborn, as it has been reborn 1,000,000 times before. This is the promise that winter always keeps, that it will end. That warmth will return. That life will continue. But that is tomorrow's story. Tonight, there is only rest. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts grow soft and distant. The cottage around you fades into gentle darkness. And you are floating now, carried on the warm currents of sleep toward whatever dreams await. You have earned this rest. You have earned this peace. Let it hold you now. Let it carry you through the quiet hours until morning light arrives. The fire is almost embers now, glowing, soft and deep. The family sleeps around you, their breath rising and falling in the ancient rhythm of survival. The winter night stretches out, peaceful and still. No longer an enemy, but a companion. You are part of this moment. You belong here, in this warmth, in this safety, in this gentle ending. Sleep now. The long night has passed. The cold cannot reach you anymore. Rest, as they once rested. Dream, as they once dreamed. The warmth will hold you until morning. Sweet dreams.